Dear listener, welcome into Other People's Shoes, Season 17, entitled Dear. This season, we venture into emotional territories as we explore words left unsent through this intimate process of writing a letter that was never meant to reach its recipient. The raw, unfiltered authenticity that speaks volumes in these letters. These unrevealed stories, confessions, and reflections held within these letters until now are powerful. Welcome to Dear. Sincerely, Other People's Shoes.
Welcome into Other People's Shoes.
You've got mail.
I am your host, Neil Matthews. Thank you so much for hitting play today. Really excited that you've decided to hang out with us today. It's a great day to join us, by the way. I call it season finale day. We have made it to the end. As my good friends from Boys to Men say, we have finally come to the end of the road. And though we know that the road has ended, we still know that there's still shows left to be done. So don't let this be the end of your journey. Let it only maybe be the beginning of your journey. Because next week, we start season 18. What is that going to involve? What is that going to invoke? What is that going to travel down? Where will we go next? It's almost like Carmen Sandiego. Like, where in the world will we go next? Well, don't worry, don't fret. Next week, we will still have a show as we start a new season. Before we get to season 18, we have to conclude. We have to say sincerely. Maybe we have to say P.S. We have to say respectfully submitted, all the ways I've ended letters in the past. We have to say in his sandals, perhaps even. We have to close our letter, put it in the mailbox, flip the flag up, and wait patiently for the mailman to take our letter. So I thought, in preparing for the end of the season, I thought, who better way to end our season than a very near and dear friend of my heart. In fact, she has spent so much time with me growing up. I don't think of her as no longer a friend. I really think of her as this like extension cousin, like maybe a Care Bear cousin, because we've walked enough roads together and our lives have intertwined for so many years. It is with great pleasure I introduce you to, I'm surprised we even got her off an airplane to be here today. All the way from Pendleton, Oregon, my good friend, Alana Jean, or as I like to call her, Alana. Alana, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Neil. Thanks for that great intro.
Well, I was going to go your full name. I'm so afraid maybe it's not the way I think it should be anymore. Maybe you're taking on new names now and new identities, perhaps.
No, I mean, when it comes to family, Alana Jean is really, that's the one you hear.
Well, that's the one I heard most often, maybe screamed or maybe not screamed, echoed through the hallways of your home growing up,
Yeah, screamed maybe from time to time, yes.
All right. Well, I was trying to, do respect to those involved and maybe said screaming.
Yeah.
Yes, Alana, I don't even know how long I've known you. I'm sure I knew you before you were born. I'd have to check the resident expert of all things, Alana. Sadly, I did not get her to verify. I'm sure I've known you since before you were born. Your brother,
yes.
You and your brother Eli, who I think at one point in time I probably almost killed. So that's another story maybe for another time.
Yeah, I think the 3 or the 4 of us. Yeah, that was probably the case. Yeah, our moms were best friends from high school, I believe.
I believe
if not
so.
Before.
Yes, I believe so. High school, I think, is where the genesis of their relationship began.
Mm-hmm.
Your mom, prior to her passing, which we'll get into momentarily, did tell me some stories about my dad, some of which I'd never heard truly before, ever. It was kind of cool that your mom shed some light onto that. Of course, what I know of your dad, very little, because he was very quiet, much like your brother. I remember him laying on his stomach, looking through a Beckett, which is the baseball card index of how much a card was worth, and him doing that while Eli laying on his back, kind of like capybaras now. That's what I envisioned too.
Yeah. Oh, that was a common sight in our household growing up. Yep. That was Eli's spot.
And then you would be running around doing who knows what with your horses and ponies and things of that nature.
Very accurate. Yes.
So just to paint a picture for folks, we've walked some roads together. We've traveled together, not in airplanes. That's a little inside joke with Alana and I. So if that comes up, now you know.
Yep.
Our families have been intertwined for quite a while.
Yes. And continue to be.
Yes, absolutely. I was excited because, again, as I was trying to figure out how to wrap this season up, like going back to my notebook and writing down names, and the name that I kept honestly writing down was your name with a question mark next to it. And I thought, okay, I need to just be the bold host that I claim that I am sometimes and make this big ask for you to come on. I feel like, again, like I told you before we started recording, that you just kept coming to my mind because I think your story has power and I think your story can impact others. And also the flip side of that coin is encourage others too. I wanted to hear from you on your story. You've walked through some kind of horrific things involving those two people specifically. So I want to give you time and space for that. Before we get to there and your story, we got to know this. If we were to find you in a pair of shoes that are so comfy and so awesome, what pair of shoes might we find you in?
Ooh, probably a casual pair of Nikes.
Okay. Is there a certain name of Nikes, or do we just want to leave it casual, comfy? Because you're a nurse now in some regards, right?
Yes, which may be a different story for a different time. Yeah, I still am very much in the nursing world, sort of in a different way than I used to be. Yes, still in long-term care. Yeah, some just kind of pair of casual Nikes. Could be Air Force Ones. Could be kind of more just something very athleisure.
Athleisure. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good term, athleisure. That's fun.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now is there a certain color that they may be in this athleisure?
Likely to be neutral. Whether it be black, maybe gray, but something very neutral.
It's very boring, though.
I know. That's just me, I guess.
In your old age, you've become boring?
I suppose so.
Okay.
But I mean, I guess I have pink hair, so I can't be that boring.
Would you ever consider wearing light blue active leisure wear Nike?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I do have a pair of light blue Nikes.
Okay. You talk about Air Force Ones. I just got some, my first pair. They're white, and then the swoosh is light blue. I know, shocking, right? That the swoosh would be light blue.
Yeah.
Super shocked on your face right now.
The entire backdrop behind you, it's like I'm looking through a light blue, like I have light blue glasses on. I'm not exaggerating for any listeners. That's exactly what I see. Everything has a light blue tint.
Are you surprised? But wait, hold on. I can put on my sunglasses because it's a little bright today. So,
my God.
Is that better?
I don't see any Marvin the Martian though. Is he in there?
He is. You can't see him. He's off camera right now. So I have a chair over here. Okay. It's like Blue's Clues, the chair. You probably don't remember Blue's Clues, but you might.
I do.
They had that chair, that Steve or Joe would sit in. Yeah, Marvin's over there. It's the one, maybe two things Marvin the Martian that I have. Not very many. It's all North Carolina now. I know, shock it, right?
I see that for sure.
Well, so help me with this. We've been asking everyone this question, so we don't want to leave you out of it. We've been asking people to write a letter. Now, you really went to task on this. Like, in other words, you really went keyboard to Word document. You sat down and actually created two different documents for two different people.
Yes.
I want you to share those. So I'm just going to brace everybody now. She's going to read them. She's going to read them in their entirety, and then we're going to kind of debrief on them. Let's start with who did you write them to and maybe the why?
I wrote them to, I started first with my dad. My dad passed away when I was 11. He's the one that came to mind first because his passing happened first. Although losing both of my parents, of course, was very difficult. His had just a very different impact. No worse or better, if you will. It came at a time in my life where it made a bigger impact. His was easy to just start it all off with, get all my thoughts out on paper.
Okay, and then the second one was to who?
The second letter's to my mom. She passed away 5 years ago. I was well into adulthood at that point. I think I was would have been in my early 30s. Had two young kids at the time on my own at that point when she passed. Still very difficult. Both were very unexpected.
Both had an impact even on my life. I didn't know your dad, as I already talked about, super well. He seemed very closed off. And when I was a kid, I will just say for me, a very quiet example of what it was like to be a dad. And what I know of him just from your brother's stories and even some of your stories, he was always there. He was very dependable. He was almost like an anchor, just always there, very silent, stoic anchor in some respects. Now your mom was a little more vocal. I have many memories of talking to your mom about your dad. He did pass so young in your life. I remember my mom, of course, as we already talked about, our moms were best friends in high school. And I remember my mom telling me of your dad's passing and then the situation surrounding that, how you were with him at the time of his passing. When I'm thinking about closing out this season, I thought, I wonder if Alana's willing to talk about that day with her dad. So maybe here we go. So there's maybe a good segue into that. Would you be willing right now to share that letter about your dad?
My dad was very involved in mine and my brother's sporting events. Just anything that was of interest to us was of interest to him. I was a fifth grader at the time, and he was my basketball coach. So I had spent the night at a friend's house Friday night. Saturday morning, we have our basketball game. I had the game and everything. And then following that, he had to do practice pack tests. So he was a wildland firefighter. I don't remember exactly all the specifications, but I believe it was somewhere along the lines of having to walk 3 miles in under 45 minutes with 50 pounds of water on your back, which I can say that's a quick pace that is clipping right along. He wanted to practice that as he had the upcoming test. So I went with him, and it was along a pretty, not desolate, I mean, it wasn't far from town, but it actually ran right along our local airport. It is not a commonly traveled road. Gone with him, accompanied him, as anytime I had an opportunity to be his shadow, I was. I was always with him when I could. I remember him commenting how far we were in that walk, and it was around 2 miles. I was walking directly behind him. He collapsed forward and then rolled off into a ditch that, not that it was just a drop off, it was definitely a dip off the side of the road. And he'd landed on his back. I was 11 years old at the time. I knew that he likely needed CPR. I knew what it was, but I didn't know how to do it. I felt very helpless. I couldn't do anything. I knew he needed help. It's at this point that time gets really fuzzy. There was a car that came by. Mind you, this is 1998. There's no cell phones. If anyone does have a cell phone, I mean, it was probably like a bag phone. Anyway, I don't believe this woman had one. I waved her down, and she sped back towards town to get help. And then a mother and her daughter eventually walked up on us. And I was really just trying to coach him through breathing, which in retrospect, that was pretty useless. He couldn't do anything. He did end up having a massive heart attack. Eventually, fire trucks come. It was a long time until a face I recognize shows up. Again, time is fuzzy. I'm not sure how long, but it was a very long time before my mom and brother came. And then we went to the local hospital, and that's where we found out that he had not made it. That's the story in the background of that day.
Have you ever blamed yourself?
No, and I actually do go into that. I really don't. I never have. I think a lot of people would, and I kind of do know why, which I'll get into. I never have.
As I said, we know each other very well for the most part. Interfamily twined together through our stories, paralleling lives in some respects. You know, you guys always in Oregon, us in California growing up. I spent my summers in Coos with my granny, and you spent time over there as well. You and Eli both, your brother. I've never asked Eli that question, if he's ever blamed you. I've never got a chance to ask your mom that question, but I have a sneaking suspicion your mom would have said, absolutely not. She's 11. There's no way. The reason why I asked about the nursing thing for you, when I knew of you and we were kind of sort of connected again in light of your dad and your mom doing this kind of special thing for Calvin, you know, Eli's oldest son, kind of a redo memorial service or a remake of the memorial service so Calvin could see the impact that your dad had on people's lives, which I think was profound and amazing. Truly, that was one of the last conversations I actually had with your mom on an intimate level, I'll say. In that, I still never had the courage to ask her that question if she ever held you, again, not responsible, if she wondered if you could have done more or been more on that day. And I think her answer would have been no. I truly believe that. But again, you getting into the nursing field and you getting into some kind of life-saving elements, if you will, I wondered if that played a part and a role in you chasing or pursuing that
Oh,
career
yeah.
because of your dad?
Oh, 100%. It had a pretty profound influence on why I chose the path that I did professionally. I ended up getting into long-term care, and I think it's really just the way that our healthcare is structured now. I don't feel like I get from it what I wanted to. And I don't think you actually know this. I've started doing nutrition coaching, and that truly has done everything that I hoped getting into nursing would do. Both of my parents, I think that their health very much impacted why they passed away when they did. It's like that's just me giving back to anyone else who may be kind of on that path as well.
Let's hear those letters.
All right. Dad, while this letter could focus on the negative, the sad, the unfortunate outcomes that were a result of losing you, I want to be sure to utilize my words to speak of the good, the positive, and the lessons learned since that February day in 1998 when we lost you. While proofreading this letter, it took plenty of thought and reflection to realize why even just saying the word dad would make me tear up over and over. Full of emotion, kind of tears, yes, but not those of sorrow. For 26 years now, when I talk about you, I always say, my dad. However, now, with starting this letter addressed directly to you rather than about you for the first time in so many years, it feels as though I'm not simply speaking into a void. What a gift to be able to do so. Many times I have started going down the mental rabbit hole that is thinking through what could have been done differently in those perilous moments as you were struggling for your life. However, I am immediately halted in doing so with the simple thought of your reassurance. You never would have wanted me to live with such feelings, and for that reason, I never have, as it is all-consuming to live with the guilt and the thought of what could have been. And that goes for any aspect or situation in life. On the contrary, I hope that you wouldn't feel a shred of guilt either for having had any role in what would be the most pivotal day of my life. I want you to know that I've never had a doubt in my mind that I was meant to be the person with you on that February day. While of course traumatizing, I am okay. In fact, because of you, I'm more than okay. In the aftermath of the days that followed, and even at the age of 11, with some reflection, I knew that I was the one who could best handle being with you when this happened. The person who could carry the memory with them for the rest of their life and not be consumed by that memory. I've come to realize over the years just how many gifts you've given me. While you were here on earth and since your passing, you truly are the gift that keeps on giving. From our shared love of hamburgers, affinity for soft rock of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, to the life lessons you taught me as a child about integrity and how to treat others, how to love your spouse and children, and finally to how loss and trauma can teach us much more than we often know is even possible, more than we could even imagine. Losing you has shown me just how much that loss and trauma can make someone a softer or a harder person, and maybe a little of both. I've seen people, yes, even as a result of losing you, become harder in the way that they become bitter. They become a victim of their own life rather than an active participant, believing that they have little to no control over their own destiny, that life simply happens to them. I've also seen these same situations lead to a person becoming incredibly resilient. Initially after losing you, our world came to a screeching halt. And just like I'd heard before, and countless times since, it was a nightmare that we just couldn't wake up from. Nonetheless, the world around you does indeed keep spinning when it feels as though your own world has stopped, and you are left to navigate life with a map you can no longer read. Those who become resilient learn that by overcoming such overwhelming barriers, they develop a mindset where they can overcome anything that crosses their path. On the other hand, you taught me that loss can cause a person to become softer, more understanding, softer in the way that you can see yourself in others and others in yourself. Some may say that you can put yourself in other people's shoes, provide immense inspiration, an understanding that they can receive from few others, a shoulder to cry on without expecting anything in return, a true servant's heart. I'd like to think that although losing you was the hardest thing that I've endured to date, it's led to some great things that you would be so proud of and so proud to be a part of. You have truly been the ultimate teacher. You always have been, and will continue to be the standard for who I strive to be as a friend, a mother, and a spouse. You don't just inspire me, but also so many others. To this day, I will have friends from elementary school share memories of you with me. People still love to talk about you. People who knew you professionally will tear up or beam with excitement to hear that I'm your daughter, to have a piece of you standing in front of them. You had and still have an impact that far outreaches your lifespan. A real legend, if you ask me. A swim meet was named after you, a plaque placed at my elementary school in your memory where you spent so many hours of my adolescence, endless treasured photos on the fridge, walls, and furniture of your loved ones. I can say with near certainty that your grandkids, as well as nephews who never were fortunate enough to meet you, feel like they know you because your memory is still so very much alive. I rejoice at the opportunity to talk about you and the incredible human being that you were. In fact, I still celebrate the day that you were born, as well as the day that you died. Anything that gives me a reason to remember you. It may not be anything extravagant. It may be me making our favorite meal, sitting with my thoughts for a few minutes while I recall some of my favorite memories with you, or maybe a peaceful walk. But I celebrate you somehow, some way, and refuse to spend the day sitting and making friends with grief. I want to share that you've come to see me in many of my dreams over the years. No other dream I have is a recurring one, but you are the exception. Though they differ ever so slightly from one to the next, you appear in a flash, and I am only able to share that you've been gone for many years, which you are utterly oblivious to and confused by. No other details are shared, and we go on to have a glorious day together, and I wake up with a cup that is full to the brim. So happy to have spent that time with you. And it is so real and vivid. Another gift. It's so easy for people to say that they have the best parent, but I just cannot even imagine how you could be outdone. Songs like The Cat's in the Cradle will always take me back to sitting in the backseat of our Ford Taurus. The beginning of the song would start, and Eli and I would know it was coming. You'd tell us to be quiet while turning up the music and making us listen to the entirety of that song before then turning around and telling us that we are to let you know if you ever bear any resemblance to the dad in that song. Just so you know, never would you have ever come close to being anything other than the greatest. You made sure that despite being our provider, you were also our biggest supporter. Taking on meet director for our swim team, taking a break to be present at our assemblies, showing up to coach our basketball and soccer teams in your work boots and hickory shirt, along with the best attitude and a goofy grin despite having a long day behind you already. And you weren't just a great father, spouse, or friend, but an overall great citizen to all you met. You didn't have a single enemy. I'll never forget being on a family vacation, not even in Oregon anymore at this point in the trip, and coming across some smoke on the side of a desolate highway and a single water truck that had clearly just responded to a fire that had started. In a single swift movement and without a word spoken, you came to a halt and threw the Bronco into park, running across the road to jump in and help. A while later, you reappeared, blackened face and smiling and laughing, along with the driver of the water truck, who incessantly thanked you for your help, asking again your name and where you were from before resuming our family trip like nothing had happened. That's just the kind of man you were, and we were and are so proud to claim you as ours. What a role model. Lastly, I want to thank you for exemplifying the special bond that exists between a father and daughter, a confidant, a picturesque example of what a girl should expect in a friend and partner, her first love. And the bar that you set was a high one. You were all of those things and so much more. Though our time together was far more brief than what is ideal, every second, every memory, and every lesson learned is a treasure. I know that you would have given anything to be present for my upbringing, as well as your grandkids. And though it wasn't what we wanted in our perfect world, you have been more present than you could ever imagine. Love, your little girl.
Wow. How long did it take you to do that?
It took a while because it was very emotional. I read it out loud several times. I knew it would just be too emotional to read on the fly. I'm very surprised I made
I'm
it
proud
through
of
that.
you.
Thank you.
A couple of things that come to mind. One, first thing that comes to mind, if you could go back in time to 11-year-old you, time travel back right now with me.
Uh-huh.
Your age now, which I know you're younger than me. That's all I'm going to say. Way younger than me. I
I'm
will
not
add.
yet 40.
Okay, there you are. If you could go back in time to 11-year-old you with what you know, with what you're armed with all the information you have, what do you go back and tell 11-year-old Alana?
Oof. That's going to take a second, Neil.
It's okay. Take your moment.
I think that it would really, I honestly feel like I handled it quite well at that age. I think what I would have liked to do differently is not be so closed off towards my mom. If I had to pick one thing that I could change, it would be to try and nurture that relationship with her more. It's something I'll get into, not in a lot of depth. I've always had a really hard time understanding why I did that. I think it was just harder for me to relate to my mom than it was my dad. I don't know. I would tell myself to just be closer with my mom right from that point on.
Would you have any counsel for your 11-year-old you to your brother or your other family members maybe?
It would really actually take some thought for, the first thing that comes to mind when you say my brother, I feel like
Let's be honest. Let's put our cards on the table. There are some challenges with you and your brother right now. We don't have to go in depth in that. That's not necessarily needs to be shared.
I don't feel like it is dirty laundry.
That wasn't the point of my question.
I don't even have anything bad to say. I just wish that it was better. And I think that everyone in our family thinks the same thing. I think I speak for many people.
I want you both whole and happy. How about that?
Yeah. And I can't help but think that the passing of my dad only sort of accelerated or worsened any.
Well, I wonder if it kicked it off.
Mm-hmm.
And then the passing of your mom kind of sealed it.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it.
And maybe I'm putting words in your mouth. If I am, I'm sorry.
No, you're not.
Here's where I'm at. And really, you did this. So I'm sort of blaming you, but not blaming you. So your dad passes away in 98. I think 2 weeks later, my granny passes away.
Yeah.
It was so like right in line with that.
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about that until this moment.
Really?
We were dealing with stuff with my granny because she was towards the end of her life.
Yeah.
I'm almost positive we were in Eugene. My family and I were in Eugene, and your mom calling up to us in Eugene, calling my mom in Eugene, saying that your dad had died and that you were with him.
Wow. So Granny passed away first or after?
I think after.
Okay.
I think after. I'd have to go look at the dates. Because she died at the end of February, and I think your dad died at the beginning of February, if I remember right.
February 7th, yeah. Wow, I don't remember that at all.
But I remember being in so much grief with my granny, selfishly, that I never even thought of what does 11-year-old Alana need? What does 11-year-old Alana, a friend or a giggle or a ice cream cone?
Just like I said in that letter, I truly knew that my mom, oh my gosh, like I would have happily been the one to be there over my mom. I would just never want her to be there for that. I've always felt the same about Eli. Always.
I don't know your brother well enough on an emotional level, I'll say, to know how he would have responded. I think at 11, there's still an innocence to you. There's still a naiveness to you, perhaps. Again, I'm projecting that I think you saw your hero die and there's really nothing you could have done.
Yeah.
And that part always has plagued me. Does she wish she could have done more? Does she wish she could have saved him? And again, maybe that's where the nursing and the nutrition thing now plays an element, which I think it does, as you already talked about. Let's move on to your mom. So the last conversation I had with your mom, we were talking about how she had recreated kind of a memorial type, I don't want to say service, but type of event, truly, where people came out in droves, truly, to, I mean, I remember the elementary school being packed with people and people speaking about your dad and kind of recreating a memorial event specifically for your nephew, Calvin.
Yeah.
And really the whole town kind of turns out in a lot of respects to kind of recreate a memorial event for your dad specifically. And I remember that weekend kind of talking to your mom one-on-one, not only about my mom and my dad, really her, and your dad's name is Scott. And my mom told me years after that my parents had considered naming me Scott in honor of your dad, which would have always been weird to me. Not in a weird way, like an honoring way, like, oh, wow, why didn't I get Scott? I got Neil instead. That's such a not cool name. I don't know. I loved your mom dearly. She was so sweet. And there's so many little Kelly memories I have of your mom. There's not a Christmas that will go by that I won't think of your mom because she made our family stockings, not only mine, but my wife's, but Adia's.
Yeah.
I can't picture SeaWorld without thinking of your mom because we went to SeaWorld, it seemed like so many times as kids with you and Eli and all the things and you being pushed around in one of those dolphin stroller things. Like, I don't think they have those anymore. That's what I remember. There's not a camping trip that goes by that I don't think about your mom.
Yeah.
And I can't think about Coos Bay without thinking about your mom and your dad and your family.
Yeah.
And my granny because she lived there as well.
I have a lot of memories of your granny too.
Well, that's awesome. See, that's cool. I got a text on my birthday from your mom. It's kind of weird because your mom wasn't one to text a lot, at least me.
No. She had a flip phone. She never had anything other than a flip phone.
And so for me, she actually texted me like a couple of days before my birthday and she said, hey, I just heard the Cat Stevens song, Cats in the Cradle, and I thought of Scott. And I just wanted to say happy birthday to you. And I was like, that seemed out of the blue for Kelly to do something quite like that. 2 days later or 3 days later, she passes away.
Yeah.
Help me with that. What did your mom mean to you? And maybe what did you take away? Maybe a lesson learned from your mom that you carry now on as a mom that you learned from her.
Oh my gosh. My mom she was just born to be a mother. She was just one of those people. She lived for her children and loved her grandkids too, poured herself into her family and anyone she loved. And I mentioned this at the time. I didn't really see it until, years later. And I wish she would have poured more into herself. She really lived for others. She loved her people. She loved them hard.
Do you ever look at your life now? As you said, not in your 40s yet. Thank you for that reminder, by the way. Makes me feel even older. Do you ever look at your life now and somehow want them in your life, or are you okay with them not being in your life? Help me with that.
Oh, yeah. Like there's a lot of pretty stark reminders. The holidays are pretty hard. That's the one time I kind of feel a little like I have to look inward and say to myself, stop with the self-pity. But that's the one time. Christmas is hard. But I have a lot of memories of Christmas, and I have a big family of aunts and uncles and grandparents. There's a lot of people. There's a lot of people other than my parents that are gone. Those holidays don't bear any resemblance to what they used to. My kids don't have their grandparents. That's really hard. Yeah, I think about it quite a bit. And especially another time it'll cross my mind is when, say, mutual friends and I will want to meet up. It's easy for them to have a sitter. And not that it's so much the sitter part. It just makes me think, I wish my parents could have that close relationship where it's grandmas and grandpas is their second home. It makes me think a lot during those kind of times when I don't have the support of my parents. I really don't feel like I have a lot of self-pity for that. The thought does cross my mind often.
Well, I went back to Coos Bay a number of years back. I ran the Prefontaine, sort of ran it. I don't even want to say ran it. That makes me sound more awesome than I am.
A light jog.
Survived it. For those that don't know, check that race out, Prefontaine Memorial Run. It's brutal. I remember going a couple of days before the race, and my mom and I stayed with your mom. The first year I did it, we'd gone over there the day before the race, so I had kind of time to kind of bebop around Coos Bay. I went on a Mecca, I guess you could say. I went to all the Prefontaine sites and monuments that they have around town. That year they had just finished murals that are downtown now. They're famously downtown. And I found myself on Madison Street where my granny lived, and I went down to her street and I know exactly her address, and there's a new person living in her house, and I drove down the street and I couldn't even get halfway down the block before I'm just weeping.
Mm-hmm.
Day of the race, I find out that the turnaround by that Chevron station on Ocean Boulevard is diagonal across from where her headstone is on that cemetery. And so I'm again weeping, partly because I'm in pain from the race, but also because of the cemetery being diagonal, like kitty corner from the turnaround. It just makes me sad because I want her there. I want her still to be there, to be on Madison Street, to not be in the cemetery, to be maybe at the top of the hill cheering me on. You know, I wonder for you, when you go back home, because you do go back to Coos Bay quite often because you have friends and you went to high school there. And
yeah,
is it hard going back to your mom's house on your mom's street, seeing the old house for you? Or am I the only one?
It's really funny because when I go home, it's almost like a ritual. I have to. I mean, as soon as I pull into town, my first instinct, and the first thing I do every time. I drive straight to Augustine Street, check out 980, just do a quick, slow drive by. It's like I have to get that out of my system before I can do anything else. The house looks a lot different now. There's been a couple owners since her passing. It's hard to see, not like it was initially. It was really hard to sell the house because my parents built that house or had the house built. So they were the original owners and had it until 2020. I think we sold it in 2020. It looked much the same after my dad passed away. My mom kept it. Yeah, it didn't look much different as the years went on. I think it was probably hard for her to change the look of it. It was very much a memory of my dad. Yeah, that house holds a lot of meaning, not just for my mom, but, both of my parents. There's just a lot of nostalgia behind it. I don't think it's negative.
I can't even get on Madison Street, get to the school, and that's about as brave as I get sometimes.
Yeah.
When I've gone over there. So, well, let's talk about your mom's letter. You ready for that one?
I'm ready. Mom, there are so many things that come to mind when I think of you. A stubborn, humble, selfless adventurer who loved her family above all else. What stands out about the 32 years spent with you is the way in which you were able to pick yourself up from the devastation that was losing your husband, to then navigating how to raise your two children with as much grace and grit as you did. You knew that losing Dad took a piece of each of us, and that piece looked a little different for each individual. You knew that me being a daddy's girl through and through took my best and most trusted friend from me, just as your best friend was taken from you. Despite the fact that you had lost so much yourself, you still looked to the needs of your children before your own. In retrospect, I do wish that I'd known to give you the encouragement to do things for yourself as well. You knew that my bond with Dad was special, and you saw that my strong will, determination, and independence would come in handy, and maybe pose even more of a challenge for you, which I do know that it did. I will never forget how you handled the loss of our family patriarch in the way that you did. Your tears dried quickly, though I'm sure behind closed doors they did not, only to be replaced by your steadfast determination to continue raising your kids the way that you and Dad had intended, whether or not he was there. Although I write a letter to you and a letter to Dad separately, it's nearly impossible for me to think of one of you without thinking of the other. A true team and a spitting image of what I see when picturing an ideal marriage. You loved one another in such a way that has inspired many. In fact, not only was this spoken of by family and friends at Dad's service, but the inspiration your marriage provided was also spoke of at your service 21 years later. For that many years, your relationship continued to be impressionable and gave people something to strive for and look up to. Dad looked at you like you walked on water. And though I wasn't there to see it, I've heard many times how his love gave you a confidence that you'd never had before. Something that I could see you lost right along with him. I don't think you understood how anybody could love you the way that he did, but allowed you to believe that you were worthy of more than you'd ever known before. And you never gave it a single thought to give your heart to another man. To you, Dad was your one and only. Nobody could come close to him in your eyes. I treasure your letters back and forth to one another during your dating years. So tender and sweet. You two were so in love, and the love you shared has lived on and continues to be a North Star for what I wish to have for myself. There was a time where I couldn't imagine saying this, but it didn't take long to realize that I've taken on more of your traits than I ever thought I would. An affinity for national parks, old homes and historical structures, long road trips, a home-cooked meal, hiking trails, epitomizing sentiment in human form. Mom, you were a badass. Being one of very few women in the Forest Service in the 1970s, being on a helitack crew, or hiking desolate trails, people still revel at you taking Eli and I on the 40-mile Rogue River Trail. No phone, this was prior to cell phones, no weapon, and no man. Just you and two kids, remote location, for a week to navigate the wilderness. You would jump at any chance to expose not just yourself, but your kids to the outdoors. From a young age, you taught us to appreciate the simple pleasures of what nature provides. We didn't have to travel across the ocean or even out of state to find it either. Your sense of adventure did concern Dad at times, though. I vividly recall when we were young, we were in the town of French Glen, a tiny community in rural southeastern Oregon. The town sits adjacent to the Steens Mountains, and you found a rugged, narrow, windy gravel road that you just couldn't stand to go untraveled by us and our tourists. Before setting off on our adventure, you sternly directed us to not tell Dad that we had taken that road. And we kept that promise. In addition to being the most stubborn, you were the most selfless person I've ever encountered. Also, the most loyal and family oriented. You didn't hesitate, nor would there ever be a second thought on whether or not you could make it to your nephew's sporting events across the state. You had the attitude of, let me know the date and I'm there. The same goes for my sporting events on through college. It didn't matter how far the drive, you were bound to be there, and I could count on seeing your face in the crowd. Without saying it, I know that you saw yourself as less important than you were in so many aspects and to so many people. I want you to know that just because I was so close with Dad did not mean that you were loved any less by me. Something I wish I could have told you, although I hope that you know it without me saying so. I know that without a shadow of a doubt, you would be moved to see how many lives were changed by you and rocked by your passing. The turnout for your service was incredible. People drove and flew from great distances to show their respect for you. You would be overjoyed to know that everyone was asked to bring their stockings that had been so thoughtfully made by you and to hang them upon their arrival. It was incredible to see so many of them strung up, made with so much love by you. Anyone close to you knew that if they were having a baby or getting married, Kelly would surely be making them a stocking, and there wasn't a single person that wouldn't anxiously await to receive it. You were full of sentiment and so thoughtful. The Christmas stockings are just one of the endless ways you'd show and share your love with your people. I think that you desired a relationship with me for many years that was only ever achieved after I'd had children of my own. Not that we weren't close, because we were, but we could have been closer. I know that any bitterness I held from losing Dad was seen by you, which is not something I'm proud of. It was when my kids were born that we became so incredibly close, something that I know made us both immensely happy. I'd call you for the most mundane things, and you paid no mind. Happy to talk for any reason to me or to your grandkids. In fact, although they were nearly 2 and 4 when you passed away, we talk about you nearly every single day. The kids will include you in stories and recall that you were the one to give or make them certain things that they still hold very dear. Although it's been over 5 years since your passing, there will be times, more few and far between as time passes, where something will happen that I want to share with you, or I'll have a question that I know only you can answer. After all, you were the family historian. And there will be a fraction of a second where I'll think to call you. As soon as the inclination to call comes, reality enters the picture. Rather than be discouraged, I am accompanied by a feeling of comfort to have felt you present for that brief moment. I want you to know that although you and Dad are not physically here, your voices of reason still provide much direction in difficult times. 9 months after losing you, I was still very much struggling. I'll never know what triggered the thought, but one day around Christmas, while being particularly mopey, the question came to my mind. What would my parents say if they saw me like this? Right then, it was as if I was being scolded by the both of you. Never, ever would you or Dad have wanted to see me in such a state, and that was a pivotal turning point in the grieving process. I thought about how I'd been raised and what would have been expected in a time like that. The disappointment that both of you would have to see me carrying on in such a way. Grieve, yes, but pick your head up and live your life. To live in such a way would not be honoring the two of you. Thank you for dedicating your life to those you loved. Not just me, your parents, siblings, grandkids, nephews, cousins, friends, aunts, uncles, the list goes on. The love you gave was immense and everlasting. I'm so grateful and thankful that our relationship as mother and daughter only got better with time, and I will forever cherish the time that we had together. Love always, Alana Jean.
Does your mom recognize you if she's still around?
You mean like spiritually?
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really talk about it. I thought about slipping it in somewhere. You know, I didn't grow up we're not a real religious family. Not that we have anything against it whatsoever. It's just not something we really practiced. There's just been sort of a very spiritual presence, I suppose. And maybe everyone interprets spirituality differently. Just very spiritual things have happened, or what I interpret as spiritual.
Can you elaborate?
Well, just since we're on the topic of my mom bought this house that I currently have, I've had it for 4 years now. And maybe it's just because a lot of the furniture in my home is from my parents. I feel such a presence for my mom, particularly in this house. We both, as I alluded to, love old homes. And I actually painted this house her favorite colors. She loved the colors blue and yellow together. So the house is navy blue, and then the doors are a pop of yellow. I kind of did it without thinking. It's just everywhere I look, I see her. I just have never felt like her presence ever left. Kind of oddly so. My mom passed away in Eastern Oregon, which we didn't really get into. She would make a lot of trips over here. Coos Bay is 7.5 hours away. And mom would spend a lot of time over here. She actually passed away at her sister's house. She had just been here at my house. Well, not this house, but she'd been in Pendleton visiting for 2 weeks and had just a couple days prior gone over to her sister's house. You know, I don't know if that has anything to do with it. I've just always felt a really strong just presence and comfort from her. Like she's just always been here.
It's hard for me when people die. I've never once said, oh, when so-and-so died, I'm ready for them to go. I wanted more time, or I wish I could have said, or I wanted this last whatever. I don't feel like, for me, death is still very hard. I feel like there's still so much more to be said. Elizabeth's grandmother passed away last October. The very last conversation I had with her was at a church gathering. We were outside and these tables, and she had been in and out of the hospital for some stroke type stuff. So her brain and everything was, I would say, kind of scrambled. And I don't say that out of disrespect. I just think it was just kind of scrambled.
Mm-hmm.
I was wearing these, they're actually up above my door now. They're these Velcro Jordan shoes. And she looked down and she said, your shoes have Velcro on them. That's so funny that they have Velcro. I was like, we called her Gigi Ma. And I said, yeah, Gigi Ma, they have Velcro. She said, I just love Velcro. Don't you love how great Velcro? I mean, just again, very odd, that she was enamored with the Velcro. I do. I think back to that. Why didn't I talk about something beyond how great Velcro was? It seems so frivolous.
Yeah.
And with your mom, I remember talking about things involving my mom and my parents, and nothing profound, nothing earth-shattering, nothing hold on to deeply. It seemed very surfacey, like Velcro.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever wish you could just somehow take those conversations, hold on to them, and never forget them, and almost play them back in your head?
Oh, yeah.
Or am I alone in that?
No, it's funny. Like, you wish you could... I might be a nerd for saying this. Like in Harry Potter, how they're able to have these physical, like a concrete memory that they can pull out and then give to somebody else. Kind of something like that. Or you could have a book of memories, something like that. You don't have that. And especially once you lose enough people, you lose more memories because those people tell you stories. And it might be something that you already know, but they'll sort of reignite that memory. And it just feels like with each person lost, you lose more of those memories. Does that make sense?
It does, because you don't lose them. I mean, yes, you lose them in the physical sense, but you lose that piece of them that they're helping fill in that gap.
Yes. Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
You find yourself relying on something that triggers a memory. Sure, you're going to have those core memories that you just never forget. There's, a handful of them or more. There's other things where you'll have to rely on something else to just spark it, and then you remember it.
Being a person of faith, I'll admit that happily. I remember before I saw your brother again, one of the last times I was with your mom, I actually confessed to your mom that I was so sorry as a kid. I was so angry and so hurt and so running and dealing with all the stuff I was dealing with was, as a kid and being a very angry child. And I remember saying to your mom, I'm sorry, I was such a handful, that you had to deal with my truly. No, this really happened. Like I'm like confessing to her that I was, such a bad kid, and I felt so bad that she had to deal with all that. And I said, and here's the flip side of that. I said, I need to apologize to Eli. And she said, kind of very, very dumbfounded look on her face. I can't even do it. Why do you need to apologize? I said, Kelly, you probably remember this. I said, there was this time I chased Eli down and I had a pocket knife to his throat and I was ready to slice his throat. She goes, Neil, that was like a nail file. You wouldn't have done much damage, because the knife was so dull. And I said, but I live with that. Basically, I said, but I live with that. I live with the fact I was so angry that I was going to, slice his throat open. So I thought, and she said, if you need to apologize, you should definitely do that. And so I remember like confessing to your brother, I think before you showed up, him and Andrea were there, Eli's wife. And Eli, of course, had no idea what I was talking about and said, well, I mean, I forgive you if you want, but I don't remember that. So we're okay. We're fine. I was carrying that weight.
Yeah.
Of this memory of me hurting him because I was so angry. And I don't even remember what he did. Obviously, it was so profound. I should remember if it was so catastrophic and damaging to me. But I wonder about that for you as the time goes on, as you get older. Sadly, you will get older. Do you feel like it'll get easier to let them go, or are you already there?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in a really good place with it. I think and talk about them a lot to anyone that I'm close with. It's funny. I mean, I feel like people that have never met either of my parents know so much about them. I will talk about them a lot or reminisce on stories and things that, like, just little memories. Like I'll share with my boyfriend little things that they did. I have this very specific memory of my dad. By the way, I feel like I need to say this. It's so funny to me that you remember him as being stoic.
I don't remember having, okay, so I'll give you the 5 memories I have of your dad, and there may not even be 5. So I already talked about him doing the Beckett thing and Eli laying on top of him. I mean, that was a constant. They watched Northwest Cable News, the local news station there in Coos Bay. I remember your dad taking my brother and I and Eli, you weren't able to go, you were too young, to the 1989 Batman in the Egyptian.
Oh, what a shame.
And I remember, I think it's a rated R movie, or if not PG-13. And I'm sure we weren't old enough to go, but my mom, Scott, so she let us go. But I will forever remember that first Batman with Michael Keaton. I remember where I was when I first watched that, and it's your dad. That's tied to your dad and Eli. I remember him picking us up for swimming lessons in the middle of the rain, in the middle of summer. Mm-hmm. It raining in Coos Bay and the pool being heated. I remember going to the Mingus Park race on the 4th of July and running that lap and beating Eli. That was like the highlight of my summer because I got a blue ribbon and he didn't. Eli was always annoying. He was the little brother I never wanted in some respects.
You also have these mile-long legs and we're older.
Yeah, well, beside the point, he should have been faster. Those are the things I remember. I don't remember him going to SeaWorld with us because he probably was working.
He worked, yeah.
Like, I don't remember having a one-on-one Kevin Costner and Field of Dreams, moment playing catch with him. Like, I don't have that memory.
Great reference. Yeah.
Well, I just felt like it was fitting because he was a baseball guy. Mm-hmm. I remember going to Eli's T-ball games that summer and spending summers with him. Again, I can't think of a moment, unlike your mom, where I had that down cup of coffee kind of at the table conversation. Like, I don't remember that ever happening. I remember always trying to be quiet and not in the way, with your dad. Yeah. That's what I remember. So,
I mean, when I think of him, just the first things to come to mind are he was silly, goofy, very lighthearted,
I don't remember any of that.
Big physical presence, but was a big teddy bear.
I remember going to 7-Eleven and getting big gulps.
Oh, you bet. Every day.
And Slurpees. Mm-hmm. I remember those. Much like Eli, he's quiet. He's very few words. Like, talk about him being silly. I don't remember seeing that.
Yeah, I think he could. I mean, amongst our family, we've talked about this a lot. While he was very silly and goofy, Dad was also, he was a Vietnam veteran. Mm-hmm. He, right out of high school, went to Vietnam, and I know he had some PTSD with that. To us, what that looked like was him being very quiet when anything came on that was, anything resembling military related, war, that kind of thing. he could get quiet around others, in public situations. I would never see that home. And I mean, especially now that I'm older, I'm the same way. We all need to decompress after a long day. And he was still very much present. He wouldn't go off in his own space. Maybe once in a while, like he'd love to on Sunday morning go and read the newspaper and watch the sunrise. He was always around if he wasn't working.
And the opposite, I remember your mom and you guys coming to California, your mom making pancakes with the little, Mickey Mouse pancakes or our first letter of our name in the pancake batter. I remember your mom on road trips had presents like Christmas that we could unwrap at certain junctions of the trip. I remember your mom picking my brother and I up for the swimming lessons at Mingus Park Pool, again, in the middle of the rain. I remember playing at your house quite often with Eli and you always tagging along, and we never wanted you there because you were a girl.
Mm-hmm.
No meanness. You were a girl and no
and
girls
the baby
allowed
of the group. I was
and
annoying.
The baby of the group.
Yeah.
That too. Those are the things I remember about your mom. Some of our last conversations talking about your dad and talking about my parents and kind of their origin and kind of how they connected and things like that. And, her telling me stories about Steve Prefontaine and things like that. Because at that time I was, still I am super interested in kind of his story and his journey and, how that relates to Coos Bay and that. And so she, again, like you already alluded to, being the resident historian in a lot of respects from that level, those are what I remember most. I didn't see your dad in that level. Again, not saying he wasn't. I just never remember that. If you were to put a PS at the end of these letters, what would your PS be to both your parents?
That's really hard. I think even though my time was relatively short with my dad, it is amazing to me what a presence he still has in my life at this point. You may not have much time with somebody. That time can be so profound.
Yeah, I would echo that. So what about your mom?
I really think it's just a continuation of what I'd said. Just what does and always will come to mind is just how my mom loved her kids and how she loved her husband. And those are things that I will just never forget. Something that to even mirror that to any extent, I would be very proud to be able to do.
Are you glad you did this?
Yeah, I am. It was very healing. I mean, there was a lot of emotions to sort through, a lot of tears. I can't believe I didn't squeak one out today, but I certainly did writing these. It's been great.
Well, Lana, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you for letting us into your world, into your life. Obviously, both having your parents leave your life before you hit 40 is pretty traumatic, some would say, and some challenges there. I really want to say thank you. I know I maybe pulled on the arm, back a little bit as far as the friend card or the family/friend card, but I appreciate you letting me walk in your shoes on this regard.
Thank you. I had these thoughts when you asked me to do this or if I wanted to. And I was like, what? Like, why me? I just thought, what am I going to be able to provide? Been a lot of people, countless people that have and will go through a lot worse than me. I was like, that's really just a subjective thought and statement. And that's not what being here and telling my story is all about. Loss and trauma are just an inevitable part of being human. The longer that you're alive, the more loss, the more trauma you're going to have. We're all going to have it at some point, no matter how or what way you look at it. We're here for a short time. And these traumatic experiences, you can learn from them if you choose to. It's all your own choice. And so that's what I wanted to come here to say is it's not going to initially be something that you can look at in the face and see as a life lesson, but eventually it will.
Well, guys and gals, kids and campers alike, that is it. That is all. That is our show. That is even our season. Next week, we start season 18. Where's the time gone? A lot of journeys, a lot of shoes, a lot of traveling. If we were going to be a traveling circus, which sometimes our show feels that way, a little chaotic. Isn't that kind of life, though? Life is a little chaotic at times. As we wrap up, as we get out of here, here's my challenge to you this week as we go. Look around the world that you live in. Who's that one person that you're like, okay, if I were going to nail it down to one, who's the one that if they were to go right now, I'm not ready for them to go? I know it's kind of a weird thought. Think about it. Who's the one? And do they know, without a shadow of a doubt, how you feel about them? Or is it clear to them that you would miss them, that you would want them to not be gone? Let them know. Can you this week? Can that be your challenge, to say to them, to go to them and say, listen, so-and-so, whoever it may be, Jojo, Zach, Sally, Bobby, whoever, I would miss you when you're gone. I would carry on. Let me know if you do that, if you can find that person and have the courage and the strength to go and do that. Love to know that. OPSpodcast.com is a great place to let me know. You can let us know on the socials at OPS Podcast Show on our Facebook, Instagram, and X. Of course, don't forget this as we go. Remember, when you walk in other people's shoes, you really do get a different perspective on life. I want to say thank you so much for listening to this season. Stay tuned till next week as we start season 18. We might be coming home to homecoming. Stay tuned for that again next week when we walk in other people's shoes.